This morning, I want to share with you a few thoughts from the life of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the guy in the Bible who was known for leading the charge to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem about 70 years after its conquest and destruction. He's got a book in the Bible with his name on it, Nehemiah. And one of the ways that you can remember what the book of Nehemiah is about and what he's famous for as a person is this little phrase that I learned way back many, many years ago. And it's just simply Nehemiah. Okay? So Nehemiah, because the wall around Jerusalem was about only knee-high when he arrived there to help. So you'll remember that now, won't you guys? Nehemiah. Now, please don't shoot the messenger. I didn't write it. I just delivered it. Okay? But anyway, Nehemiah is known for leading the charge, rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem. And there's another thing that he's also often known for, and that is offering up a quick prayer in the presence of the king before he speaks. Here's what happened. Nehemiah received some news from some of his fellow Jews who had just returned from Jerusalem, that the city was in ruins and the people were scattered and in danger. Well, naturally, being the good Jew that he was, this news hit Nehemiah really hard. And the next time he showed up to work in the king's presence, the king noticed that Nehemiah's usually chipper attitude was replaced with this serious sadness. And so the king asked him why. And Nehemiah just gave it to him straight. He said, the walls of the city of his ancestors are all torn down, and the people are in danger. To which the king responds with this amazing question. What is it you want? Wow. Nehemiah has just been handed the golden ticket. I mean, the genie has just given him a wish. The king is about to grant a request. And that's the point in Nehemiah chapter 2 where we read these famous words. So the king asked him, what is it you want? And the next thing we read is this. Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. And that short little phrase that then I prayed to the God of heaven and I answered the king. Nehemiah is standing there in the king's presence. He prays and then he answers the king. It's what we love to remember about Nehemiah's story because it fits our fast food, microwave, I am world that we live in today. I mean, the king asks the big question and Nehemiah takes a second to pray silently, I'm sure, as he's taking a nice long breath. He's praying, and then he replies to the king. And the king, in turn, gives Nehemiah everything he needs to complete the task he just outlined. Oh, we love those kind of prayers, don't we? I mean, it would seem that Nehemiah's 3-second prayer is answered with not only all the time he needs off work for this extended mission trip, but all the helpers and all the resources he needs to go along with it. I mean, they get the job done, and they live happily ever after. Oh, wow. Man, we'd love to just take that passage and print it off and frame it and put it up on one of the walls that we walk by every day in our house, wouldn't we? I mean, that'd just be great. And then we could just wrap up our spiritual microwavable meal here this morning and go home and be happy, and we could all be done now. But there's more to the story. There's more to Nehemiah's story than those 2 little verses. Actually, it's only 1.5 verses there in chapter 2. There's more to his prayer than what I just read. And to more fully appreciate what happened in verses 4 and 5 of chapter 2 of Nehemiah, we have to go back a page to Nehemiah chapter 1. So put the microwavable dinner away. Turn the stove up to about 250. We're going to slow cook here a little bit. Nehemiah chapter 1 reads as follows, and you're welcome to follow along in your Bible. I realize the text up there is really, really tiny. So if you got a Bible there in your pew, you're welcome to grab it. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In the month of Kislev in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keeps his commandment. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. Nehemiah was cupbearer to the king. Now let's start there and go backwards for a few minutes, okay? Cupbearer to the king. Was that a position of honor? Was that something to write home about? What does the cupbearer to the king do anyway? Well, probably guessed already that the cupbearer to the king was the guy who literally handed the king his favorite cup or mug or whatever it is that he was drinking from, filled, of course, with the king's favorite beverage. So the cupbearer was the guy who made sure the king's cup was never empty. And so in that sense, he was kind of the ancient counterpart to the butler we all wish we had at home, right? Jeeves or whatever his name is. So the cupbearer was generally regarded as a position of very high honor. After all, this person would be in the presence of the king perhaps more than any of his other servants, anybody else in his service. I mean, think about it. He's there for his meals, putting the cup in his hand. He's there anytime the king's thirsty, putting the cup in his hand. He's probably with the king a lot. And as such, we can imagine that the king would expect the cupbearer to exude certain qualities. Poise and balance, for instance. Okay, think about that for a second. I shudder to think what would happen to the poor guy who tripped over his shoelaces while carrying the king's wine and just splashed the wine all over the king's new royal robes, right? Probably wouldn't last very long in the king's royal service. Discretion was likely another important quality. After all, the king would no doubt be discussing matters of kingdom security over many meals with his royal advisors. The cupbearer was also the guy who risked his life for the king every day. In ancient days, enemies from outside and inside the kingdoms frequently sought to overthrow the king. And one of the common methods of doing this, of course, was to poison the king. And it was the cupbearer's job to make sure that no poison ever reached the king's lips. So he would regularly have to sample the king's food and drink himself, putting his own life on the line before presenting it to the king. So, cupbearer to the king, position of high honor, but loaded with great risk. This was Nehemiah's position. He was the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. Nehemiah's family and many of his fellow Jews were captured by King Nebuchadnezzar and hauled off to Babylon, ripped out of their homes from Israel. And then eventually Persia came along, conquered Babylon, and then Nehemiah, this insignificant Jew, far from home, becomes cupbearer to the new king of Persia. This is where we find Nehemiah as his story opens. He's going about his cupbearing duties in the citadel of Susa when some of his fellow Jews come to him with news about Jerusalem, the jewel of the once magnificent nation of Israel. The city is in ruins, Nehemiah. The people are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates have been burned with fire. Nehemiah is heartsick. I mean, the rug has just been ripped out from under him. His whole week has just gone down the drain. And sometimes I find that, the stories from the Bible, they seem so far away, just like ink on a page. We read them and we move on, just kind of like we read the billboard we just passed on the highway and we keep going. But something just happened in Nehemiah's life here that rocked him to his very core. All right, I want you to humor me for just a few moments, okay? I want you to imagine for a minute that you're sitting here in church on Sunday morning right now, and someone comes busting through the doors with the news that your neighborhood has just been hit with a tornado. Okay, your house is nowhere and gone, nowhere to be found. It's somewhere over the rainbow or something, okay? And all your neighbors' houses have been leveled, and the rescuers have just showed up on the scene, but they have yet to find any survivors. What are you going to do with that information you just received? What are you going to do? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to talk to your neighbor and come up with two thoughts about things that you would do if you received that information right now. Go. Okay, so tornado has just hit your neighborhood. Your house is gone completely. Your neighbors' houses have been leveled. Rescuers have yet to find any survivors. You just got that news just now. What are you going to do? Somebody, give me something. Back there in the back, yep. Call the insurance company. Okay, so that's somebody's got their phone out. They're calling the insurance company. I noticed, like, as you guys were discussing, a couple people got up and left. I was like, oh, wait, it's just a fictitious exercise. But anyway. What else might you do? What else might you do? What? Go back to the neighborhood. Some of you are going to hop in the car and go back there, right? See what's there. See how you can help. Anything else? Carrie.
Stop and pray.
Stop and pray. Awesome. Yeah. You got to stop and pray. And you know what? Say, everybody, pray for me. My neighborhood's gone. Right? Or get the whole church praying, right? That'd be awesome. Okay. So insurance, you're going to go, you're going to stop and pray, you're just going to do whatever you can do, right? Okay, let's go back to Nehemiah for a second and see what he did in this situation. But his neighborhood wasn't hit with a tornado. But first of all, understand that he didn't have the option of hopping in his car and driving back to Jerusalem, okay? He was tethered, he was a servant to the king, so he couldn't do that. He couldn't pick up the phone and call 911 or any of those other rescue agencies and say, go to Jerusalem, they need my help. They need somebody's help right now. So here's what Nehemiah did. When I heard these things, the scripture says, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. When was the last time you had to sit down because you were weeping so hard? When was the last time you mourned and fasted and prayed all at the same time? This was some deep water that Nehemiah was trudging through emotionally, okay? And then after this period of mourning and fasting and praying, he looked to God and he prayed, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Nehemiah realizes that he's got to go to the source. He's got to go to the one place he can if he's got any hope for helping him in this situation. So he goes to the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, and he approaches him with all honor and respect. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you, day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. Did you catch that? He's asking God to hear him as he prays day and night. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. Nehemiah steps up to the plate and he says, God, I realize we've blown it. And I'm confessing our sins, and not just the sins of the people who got us here. Because guess what? Nehemiah probably wasn't even born when his people were captured and hauled off to Babylon. Okay? I mean, that was because they had turned from God. But he probably wasn't even born then. But he realizes, you know what? I'm a sinner. I've done stuff that I know is not honoring to God. And I'm just as guilty as they are about not following God's decrees. And so he's owning up to that. We've committed sins against you, God. We have acted very wickedly towards you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. And then he goes on, remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. That's just what had happened. But if you return to me and obey my commands, Then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. Nehemiah doesn't need to remind God of that. God remembers his promise. But Nehemiah prays this prayer kind of as a refresher course for himself. God, I need to know that you are going to live up to your promise. That we're going to, as we turn to you, you're going to come back to us and you're going to deliver us. They are your servants and your people, he says, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And the man, of course, that Nehemiah was referring to in his prayer there was the king, King Artaxerxes. Nehemiah already had a heart for what needed to happen back in Jerusalem, but he knew he wouldn't be able to do a thing about it. He wouldn't be able to take a step outside the citadel unless God performed a miracle and had the king release Nehemiah for this task. So Nehemiah prayed, and he prayed hard. In the book we're reading, Circle Maker, Mark Batterson writes, praying hard is synonymous with working hard. Now, you know what? We'd like to think that it's not, that we can do one or the other, but praying hard, they seem to go together. Praying hard, got to work hard. Let's see if that holds true in the life of Nehemiah. His story continues in chapter 2. We've already covered a little bit, so I'll just go through rapid bullet points. He sees the king while he's performing his duties after he's gotten this news. The king notices Nehemiah is sad, asks him why. Nehemiah tells the king that the city is in ruins and that his people are in danger. The king asks Nehemiah what he needs and how long he'll be gone. So Nehemiah spells out for the king what he thinks he'll need, how long he thinks he'll be gone, and the king sends him off. A miracle. Not only did Nehemiah not die for looking so sad and downcast in the king's presence, but he even got the help he would need to go back home and to tackle this project and make things right. So Nehemiah goes back to Jerusalem. He inspects the broken wall, and then he shares his plan for fixing it with the people who are living there. And they begin to build, stone by stone. And of course, their efforts to rebuild the wall are soon noticed by three anti-Jewish leaders that don't want to see the walls rebuilt or the Jews succeed. Three guys named Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. And then this group of guys starts rallying their troops, and they start threatening Nehemiah and the people of Jerusalem. Later on in the book, we read that Nehemiah posts people night and day guarding against attack from the hostile forces. He creates a battle strategy. He has half of his men that he's brought with him, half of them working alongside the people who are working to build the wall. He's got the other half working to build the wall. Okay? And then he even has those who are carrying materials, carrying stuff with one hand, holding a weapon in the other. That's how serious they are about the threat outside the city. And then in addition to all this stress, Nehemiah also has to deal with struggles inside the city. It seems that there's a food shortage, and some people are being overlooked in the distribution of food. So in addition to working on strategizing, fixing the wall, we got to work on internal struggles as well. And for 52 days, Nehemiah worked and directed and strategized and protected and provided for the people of Jerusalem until at last the wall was finished. He had prayed and mourned and fasted before he left. For how long, we're not sure. Days and nights, it says. We're not told. But we know that he worked his tail off for 52 days straight. So that short little prayer of Nehemiah's that we like to focus on, it wasn't the only piece of the puzzle. His brief conversation with the king was preceded by days of intense prayer and followed by weeks of intense effort. So is praying hard really synonymous with working hard? Sure seems to be for Nehemiah. So where's the application for us in this story of Nehemiah today? Well, hopefully it's not too hard for us to find. Look around. God's earthly kingdom is in ruins. The walls of morality are broken down. The gates of justice are all burned. The people are in great trouble and disgrace. What are you going to do about it? Basically, there's four types of people found in Nehemiah's story of the reconstruction of the wall, basically like there are in any reconstruction wall building process. See if you find yourself in one of these groups here some way, okay? First of all, there's the apathetic, uninvolved. They're really not mentioned in the story anywhere, okay? They're kind of between the lines, but we know they're there. They're the people who really don't care one way or another what we do. They're totally apathetic, therefore uninvolved. Don't expect to see them lifting a finger or a brick or a block or a stone anytime soon. They don't care. And next you have the naysayers, the Sanballats, the Tobias, the Geshems. They don't like what they see happening, and they're going to do their best to put every possible roadblock in our way. Of course, there are also the wall builders. These are the people who understood the challenge and understand the challenge today that's before us in building God's kingdom, and who have at least an inkling of the dangers if we don't do something about it. And so these wall builders are committed to building the portion of the wall that is right in front of them, just like the people of Jerusalem did. For some of them, they were told, just build the wall right next to your house. That's all. Just focus on that. And these people say, you know what? I might not be able to do much, but I can do this. I can do what's right in front of me. And then they go at it with all they've got. And I say 3 cheers for the wall builders. Yes. And finally, there are the Nehemiahs, those elite few who have heard the reports of the state of God's earthly kingdom, or maybe they've seen it firsthand. And they've been rocked to their very core. Those warriors who have hit their knees in prayer over what they've learned, mourning and fasting and praying for God's intervention. They are those few heroes who have risen up and said, I'm willing, God, to risk my comfort, my reputation, perhaps even my life for the sake of building up God's kingdom. I'm willing to lead the charge, whatever the cost. I don't know about you, but that's the circle that I want to be in. I don't know that I'm fully there yet, but that's where I want to be. And do you want to hear one of my favorite parts about the story of Nehemiah? It's just this. Nehemiah wasn't a pastor. Okay? I just said that, and I'm a pastor. Okay? One of my favorite parts is that Nehemiah wasn't a pastor. Of course, back then it was a priest. He wasn't a priest either. He wasn't even a king. See, the thing is that you don't have to be any of those things to be a Nehemiah. Listen, I figure I've got around 25 years or so before I reach the traditional retirement age, and maybe, I don't know, maybe another 25 years after that before God retires me officially, you know what I'm saying? So I've got like up to around 50 years left in this world, and I've been asking God lately, how can I make the greatest kingdom impact with the time I have left on this earth? How can I restore those walls and reconstruct those gates and save those people from trouble and disgrace? And you want to know what God's been telling me? Well, you're going to have to follow me as I follow Christ in the days ahead to find out. But in the meantime, you probably want to start asking yourself the same question. How can I restore the walls of God's kingdom and reconstruct those gates and save those people from trouble and disgrace? God, I just want to say thank you this morning for the story of Nehemiah. His life challenges me. He challenges me the way that he prayed and the way that he got involved. Lord, he didn't just nod his head and said that he agreed or that was too bad. Lord, he did something about it. And God, I just would ask that you would work in my heart to be changing me into being more and more like Nehemiah. God, I would ask that you would be raising up Nehemiahs right here in this church family, in this room even this morning. People who are saying, I've seen the destruction of God's kingdom and it's rocked me to my core and I want to do something about it. So I'm going to seek you, God, with all my heart in prayer, and then I'm going to get up from my knees and go do something about it. God, fill this place with Nehemiahs, people who are ready and listening to you and ready to go make a difference. And let our efforts not end when we say amen. Amen.